We're living through an interesting period of history in which nobody really studies how to deal with conflict. Nobody really studies how to win in political conflicts. What people study, what people are taught to respect, is avoidance of conflict, is de-escalation of conflict. You've probably heard these terms, all your life. I met a man who had been for many years a Buddhist monk. He was a white European and he had gone to Thailand and he was a formal Theravada Buddhist monk in the full saffron colored robe. You know, he became fluent in the Thai language. He preached to Thai people. He really did live in immersion. He wasn't just hanging out with a bunch of white hippies and dreadlocks or something. He lived that life. What do you think he did with the rest of his career after he gave up being a Buddhist monk? Oh, he taught conflict avoidance. He taught conflict resolution. I think that's the term. All right, so we talk a lot about conflict resolution, and we have a sort of political education when we're growing up that has to do with minimizing, avoiding, and de-escalating conflict. And certainly, currently in the year 2022, that is what we hear about on the news all the time. The police, we find fault with them for escalating a conflict instead of de-escalating it, so on and so forth. But when we turn to the questions that matter to us most, both on massive scale of a society of millions of people, planet of billions of people, and on the most intimate scale, the one-to-one scale of friends, lovers, colleagues, and family members, very often what we're actually talking about is escalating a conflict, taking what might be a relatively minor or relatively subtle conflict between two people and raising the stakes, raising the consequences so that and until something really fundamentally changes. Now, can give you about 100 different examples here, but I think you can imagine, let's just say you have a brother, and your brother drinks alcohol, smokes cigarettes, and gambles. And he doesn't do any of these things to such an excess that it would be perceived as a mental illness in our society. He does, he's not diagnosable as an alcoholic, but this adds up to a lot of his time and energy. What are you going to do if you really want to convince him to make a change? If you don't want to normalize his behavior, you want to abnormalize his behavior. You want him to see the consequences of his actions. You even want to exaggerate the consequences of his actions. You want to, in a sense, create consequences for his actions that they currently don't have. I mean, currently he may be able to say he can still hold down his job, and his girlfriend puts up with him, and he has a wonderful social life, and his drinking and smoking and gambling, that it's really not a problem for him, but it's a problem for you. And in a sense, you want to convince him that it should be a problem for him too. Let's say you're born and raised Muslim. Your father is Muslim, your mother is Muslim, but you're not. You're an open atheist in a Muslim household. And we'll assume you're in your 20s or something, you've moved out of the house. You've got brothers and sisters. And in the same way that someone can be a little bit of an alcoholic and a little bit of a smoker and a little bit of a gambler and just get by in your life, let's say, this is a very realistic scenario for many of you. Let's say your brothers and sisters, they're not atheists and they're not devout Muslims either. They're just a little bit Muslim. They just get by. They get along with their parents. They get along with the church. They get along with worldly authorities. Oh, that's a real easy situation to avoid conflict in. Both of them are. Right? We can be conflict avoiding. We can have conflict resolution. We have conflict minimization. We can de-escalate. We can all just get along. And years are going to go by, and nothing is really going to change. Right. So, what about the conflicts in which exactly what we want is to insist that people be uncompromising, that they face up to the consequences and implications of their beliefs, of their decisions, of their commitments. That actually what we want to do is abnormalize their behavior, to lead them into a situation where they are distantiated enough from, alienated enough from the trappings of their daily life, things that they've learned to ignore, things that have become invisible to them through repetition and familiarity, things you see and do every day, which can include prayer. I mean, things you see and do every day can include drinking alcohol, and it can include praying to a God that doesn't exist. And you want to stop this cycle of self-justifying, compromised behavior, and say, no, 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 let's really think about this. Okay, what if you have a family where your father takes antidepressants, your mother takes anti-anxiety drugs, and let's say she was diagnosed at some point with attention deficit disorder. Maybe she also has to take sleeping pills to help her because she's on the meds for those other things screw up her sleep. And you got a number of brothers and sisters and cousins, and seemingly everyone is on mind-altering prescription medication 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And for them, it's normal. Like the gambler I talked about as the first example, right? Probably they're all accustomed to complaining about the side effects. Probably they complain amongst themselves. Oh, I've been taking such and such on my doctor's recommendation. Oh, and they tried increasing the prescription, and then we tried decreasing it, and then I tried switching to this other drug. They probably do admit that there are problems, admit that there are drawbacks. Probably they admit things like erectile dysfunction as a side effect, loss of sense of smell. I mean, I've known people who take these drugs. They have all kinds of weird side effects, just loss of sleep and all kinds of things that different effects. Probably, but for them, right, it's become normal. It's something they accept, it's something they've made peace with. And if you want to challenge them, if you want to really challenge them about the question of what do they believe and what are the implications of those beliefs if you think them all the way through. Do you believe it's good to take a medicine that has been debunked, that has been scientifically proven to not work, to not be effective for the disease you claim you have? It's a whole separate question here, whether or not that disease even exists scientifically. But, do you think it's moral and good for you, not even your doctor, not even the bogeyman of the big pharmaceutical corporation, but do you think it's good for you to encourage people to take a drug that is non-effective and that has side effects that include brain damage? Medically proven. We can show it through an X-ray. We can show it through an MRI scan. We can show it through examining cadavers. We can prove permanent brain damage. Is that really what you believe? Are those the tenets of your religion? Is that really what you're willing to live with? All these people are comfortable. Okay, you can't solve the problem through conflict avoidance or conflict resolution. We're talking about conflict creation. We're talking about, jarring people out of their complacency. And again, abnormalizing what for them is completely normal behavior, right? It's part of the drumbeat of daily life. In the same way that, if you sit down and read a book on a subway, maybe when you first sit down, the noise of the subway disturbs you. You have a long subway ride, you start reading the book, and, the noise of the grinding gears and so on of the subway around you starts to disappear into the background, right? Now, again, I want to emphasize this. This kind of conflict exists at the most intimate level. Your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your parents, your brothers and sisters, right? Your coworkers at the office. And you can scale it up. And it exists at the level of the city, of the state, of the province, of the country, of the continent, of the world. And we're talking about conflict creation. We're talking about taking a situation where everybody tolerates each other. The alcoholics tolerate the sober people, and the sober people tolerate the alcoholics. The people who are morally opposed to gambling, they get along just fine with the people who go and gamble every weekend, right? And the atheists get along just fine with the Muslim fundamentalists. We're all one big happy family. And 20% of the population of the United States of America can be on a prescription with mind-altering, ineffective medication that causes permanent brain damage, antidepressants, antipsychotics. It can go up to 30%, go up to 50%. We can all keep tolerating each other. We can all keep on avoiding conflict with one another. Saying, yes, good for you. Like good, patting each other on the head, patting each other on the back. Everyone enjoying each other's company from the cradle to the grave with no conflict at all. What about creating conflict? And once you create those conflicts, creating stakes, creating consequences where there's something to win and something to lose, for both of us. Now, I haven't mentioned veganism in this video, and I don't have to. I mean, we can do the whole video. We can just talk about atheism. We can just talk about left-wing politics, right-wing politics. We can talk about conservative and liberal politics. There's so many examples I can work with here. But for those of you, my audience, who are vegan, I think you will right away know what I'm talking about, whether it's on the ethical side, on the ecological side, or even on the health side of the equation, which I talk about the least, where it's like you live in a family where it's normal for people to have heart attacks at 55. Someone has their first heart attack at 65. You're like, oh, well, that's not too bad because my brother, he had his first at 55. And like, you can live in a world where everybody's having heart attacks between 55 and 65 and everyone's dead at 75. You can have a family where it's normal to not be able to walk up 5 flights of stairs. It's just normal, like, whether it's cardiovascular or that's just normal. And it's considered extraordinary to be able to run up 5 flights of stairs and for it to be no big deal to carry, I remember moving furniture in and out of an apartment, going up and down. It's a lot of flights of stairs. There's 13 flights of stairs with every piece of baggage and whatever, that's extraordinary. Okay, well, so my point is the health side of it is the shallowest and the stupidest. I'm much more interested in the ethics, the politics, the ecology, and so on. But even on that level, right, I'm not trying to avoid conflict with you. I'm not trying to get along with you, right? This is about conflict escalation, right? Because maybe there is a little bit, right? There's a little bit of doubt gnawing away at you. Like let's say, whether it's your brother or your father, let's say a guy who's 55. I probably do have brothers who are 55 now. I do. So I'm in my 40s. I have brothers who are 15 years older than me. So I do. So I could turn to one of my brothers and say, hey, you know what? When you take your shirt off and look in the mirror, here's what you see and here's what you don't see. And why don't you think about what you're going to be like now, 55 to 65, and what you can really try. So my point is, there may be a little bit of a conflict. There's a little bit of awareness. Life doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be so hard to get up a flight of stairs. It doesn't have to be so embarrassing to go swimming at the beach or the pool when you take your shirt off. Like as a guy, I feel something gnawing away at you. Ethically, there might be some little awareness gnawing away at you. It doesn't really seem necessary for animals to be raised in captivity just to produce a hot dog. And for them to be slaughtered and suffer and pollute the air and pollute the water and have all these terrible consequences. A hot dog that really qualitatively is not that different from the experience of eating a vegan hot dog. And, in terms of health, it's even worse. There's maybe something gnawing away at them. There is some small degree of conflict there that can be escalated, right? And look, when you're dealing with left-wing politics, right-wing politics, religion, we talk a lot about the kind of acceptance and reinforcement religious people get inside the temple. It's the Hindu temple, Muslim temple, Jewish temple. Okay, yeah, but they're also a kind of pariah in the rest of society. Talk to any girl who grew up in Canada wearing the headscarf the whole time she went through primary school and high school and justifying to herself why it is she stands out, why it is she is 24/7, well, whatever, 12 hours a day when she's outside of the house. Why is it that in every class she ever took, first and foremost, everyone's first impression of her was her religion because she was wearing a religious uniform, and every job she applies for and every interaction, whether at the grocery store or anywhere else. Okay, there is some conflict there. We have a whole society and culture of saying, hey, minimize, de-escalate, avoid. Let her know that she's welcome. Let her know that you see her for the person she is, despite the fact that she's wearing a religious symbol around covering part of her face, covering her hair, and so on. Right? But there is some conflict within her. There's some part of her that's thinking the same way my brother might be thinking he should be able to run up 5 flights of stairs or something, There's some part of her that's thinking life doesn't have to be this way. And whether it's people who have been her friends who are non-Muslim, just secular people, people who are maybe this much Christian or people who are outright atheists, or it's people she sees on TV, people she sees on the news. Some part of her is thinking, I could have a life like that woman. I could be like her. I don't have to live this way, encumbered by the religion forever. And I didn't have to suffer through this in primary school, in high school. It's all for God and it's all for nothing. It's for no reason. So there is a conflict there, right? Do any of you feel confident taking someone aside and, as I say, escalating that conflict and saying, yeah, you know what? The stakes are way higher than you think they are. Making excuses for this religion. There are consequences for the next century on this planet that go way beyond you and I on the level of two people just talking to each other. There are consequences for who you want to be for the rest of your life. Maybe you got 40 years on this planet. Maybe you got 100 years on this planet. I know you're going to live to whether you got another 10 years, another 100 years, whatever it's going to be. Yeah, there are consequences on that scale, but there are also, much more serious, much more far-reaching consequences. That's let's talk about. Let's escalate this conflict. Let's make you feel responsible. Let's make you feel ashamed of yourself. Let's make you feel like if you don't make a change, if you don't start innovating, if you don't start coming up with some new options, right? You're going to hate yourself for the rest of your life for squandering this opportunity and doing the wrong thing, creating a sense of urgency, creating an awareness that you're standing at a fork in the road where you get to decide what kind of person you want to be, what kind of world you want to live in, and then what kind of commitment you're willing to make, what kind of effort you're willing to make, what kind of ambition you have to make that happen, to change the world beyond, the immediate sphere of people who already know you and love you and care about you. Now, I'll tell you something, what I'm talking about here, right away, it does have a resemblance to, 1, sales tactics. 2, religious conversion, right? If I am trying to convince you to buy a car, let's say specifically buying what Americans call an RV, a mobile home, a camper van, so this is a car you don't need. You already have a car, but now I want to convince you to buy another car, a kind of car that you're just going to use on your vacations, special vacation vehicle. Think about how similar that is to what I've just been talking about in terms of political conflict and religious conflict. Oh, you think you're happy with the car you've already got. You think you're happy with the vacations you take with your family. But now I'm going to sell you on this idea. I'm going to take this seed of doubt you've got that you could be happier if you had the ability to go camping and pitch a tent. What you really need is a vehicle that's big enough that you can put surfboards in the back of it. And you can drive to the beach with your girlfriend or your kids or whatever you've got with the surfboards, and you have a place to change into your bathing suits. Like you have, even if you don't sleep there, you have a little enclosed space. You have a place where you can have lunch, and then you can go to the beach. You've got to buy a camper. I'm going to escalate and escalate until you are ready to make this commitment to change your life. So you're ready to go into debt. You're ready to take out a bank loan or whatever it takes. You're ready to put it on the credit card to make this change in your life. Right? It resembles sales tactics. And I got to tell you something. I used to be a member of the Theravada Buddhist faith. I was good at it, guys. All right. One of the reasons I have so much contempt for my contemporaries, my competitors, who may be cult leaders and they may be religious leaders, is that I know I would be better at running the same game that they're running. You think Paul Bashir can talk a good game? You think James Aspey can talk a good game? Homie, come on. I can I can talk the Dalai Lama into converting to Judaism. Okay, bro? Like I can sell Buddhist reincarnation. I can sell Buddhist ethics. I can talk people into the philosophy and the religion of Theravada Buddhism. I'm good at it. I can work a crowd. I mean, like when I say work a crowd, so when you're talking to 30 people at once, and I can talk to people one at a time. I have experience, doing that kind of thing. I have experience, and when you're talking to someone and you recognize what it is they care about, and where you preach to that, and so on, you take advantage of what their interests and commitments already are, and you make them aware of interests and commitments that they didn't even know they had. If I actually were to do what Durian Rider did. Jesus. A friend of mine is convinced that Durian Rider is autistic, actually. I have a friend who is herself diagnosed as autistic. She has a lot of experience with autism. I remember she was talking through her analysis of him and why she believes he also is a diagnosable autistic person. I don't find it completely convincing. I don't. I'm looking at it, but he's certainly someone who struggles with exactly the kind of eye contact and conversational ability and the confidence work, taking someone into your confidence and then moving them and so on. That I have to say already as a teenager, I knew I was good at, and I knew well enough to be afraid of it. I didn't want to be a salesman, and I didn't want to be a cult leader. And I'd like to think I'm still not. you know, um, if you have people in your life uh, who are communists, if you have people in your life who call themselves anarchists or socialists, but really they're on that slippery slope, they're involved with other communist revolutionary people. You know, the problem isn't that they're radical. The problem isn't that they're uncomfortable. The problem is that they're comfortable. Like when you talk to those people, they know about the mass murder. They know about the mass starvation. They know about the failures of government. They know about that stuff, right? And the question is, how are you going to escalate this conflict? How are you going to find the basis for doubt and expand on it? How are you going to make them feel ashamed of themselves? Because they do. They support, they endorse mass murder and masturbation. They support communism. They're anti-democracy and, to be blunt, anti-freedom, whatever you want to put it, that they support this. How are you going to abnormalize that when for them it has become normal? It's part of the drumbeat of their life. Now, again, it's my point here is it's easy if you're unfamiliar with these things to think the radicalism is the problem, and all you have to do is de-radicalize them. It's kind of natural. What I'm saying to you is instead, you have to look at this and see exactly the compromise and the tolerance and the normalcy. You have to see the mediocrity of it as the problem. The problem is the extent to which they're comfortable with this today. I've dealt with a lot of communists in my own family, on the internet, face to face. I've lived in communist countries. Communism, it has been a real problem. It is a real problem. Moving ahead, it still is. In case you don't know, right now, Joe Biden is more or less in a Cold War situation with communist China. It does not look like in the next 50 years, communism is going away. It looks like this is something we're going to have to deal with more and more. So, in turning to Margaret Phelps-Roper, I get her name wrong? Megan. Thank you, Miss Faith. Melissa's just off camera here, doing the fact checking. Megan Phelps-Roper. This is an author and a sort of ex-Christian activist whose existence I was reminded of because one of my supporters on Patreon mentioned reading her book. She has a TED Talk. She has a lecture here on YouTube with over 6 million views. And she gives just 4 points of advice, points of guidance for the audience, and how to approach people of contrary ideological persuasions. And I think she's wrong about every single one of them. I think it's really, really bad advice. I know it's well intended. I know she thinks she's helping you, and she thinks she's helping you on the basis of what her own experience was, how it was she started to doubt the Christian doctrine, how it was she was converted or deconverted from Christianity to some kind of atheism. Now, the first point is perhaps the most interesting. Her point number 1 is don't assume bad intent. I can go through all these examples and more. If your brother is getting drunk and gambling, what do you mean? Don't assume bad intent. When you confront him, when you're trying to create a conflict with him, when you're trying, as I say, really still like a salesman, you're trying to increase the consequences, you're trying to escalate the conflict so that he'll make a decision to change his life. What do you mean by don't assume bad intent? Now, I think this really fundamentally reflects the extent to which she remains Christian. She thinks it is a good and pious thing to go out in the world and attribute positive intentions to everyone. Attribute the best of intentions. There's a Christian phrase. It's a terrible way to operate, frankly, even in the absence of this kind of conflict. I mean, you go into the guidance counselor's office at the university, and they have a sign on the wall saying, "We're here to help." Assume bad intent. You go to a psychiatrist's office. He has a sign on the wall saying, "Tell me all your problems. Open up your heart to me. Bare your soul. We're here to help." He may even tell you he has the cure. He has a pill in a bottle that's going to cure what's wrong with you. Assume bad intent. Even the people who are paid a generous salary to help you assume bad intent. When I have gone to unemployment offices here in Canada, I think they refer to them as employment offices. At the power of positive thinking, not unemployment, employment, but government offices to supposedly assist you in finding a job. Somebody that's their only job. They're just paid to help people who come in saying, "Hey, look, I'm trying to transition to a new career. I'm trying to find work." Assume bad intent. You are dealing with bad people who have bad motivations in all these situations, and that is in the absence of a religious conflict, in the absence of a political conflict, in the absence of an ideological conflict, such as we're talking about here. That's not even as fraught a situation as, trying to convert someone to the vegan diet. That's just, "Hey, I'm trying to get help. Your job description says you're here to help me. You're paid by the government to help me," but they're not there to help you. And sadly, they are bad people with bad intentions. Some of you guys are watching this video and you're 55 years old and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And some of you guys are watching this video and you're 18 years old. You have no idea what I'm talking about yet. Sadly, right now, real world, 2022, when you go into a police station, the police might have a sign on the wall saying, "We're here to help you." No, they're not. You have to deal with the police on an adversarial basis. You have to assume bad intent. You have to go in with all the evidence for your case. You have to say, "Hey, police officer, I'm going to compel you to do the right thing. And here's how I'm going to do it." And I've had that experience even when I went in just to report that I got hit by a car. I was a pedestrian hit by a car. And you would think they were interrogating the Taliban. The level of hostility and threat, which I was very good at dealing with. I cope with that very well. Other people would have broke down weeping. It was that bad. And I could say the same here. So I'm pointing out the window because that's where it happened. When I confronted the police here about drug addicts openly injecting themselves, I don't know if it was heroin or fentanyl, but injecting themselves with needles in public, broad daylight, and the police refusing to enforce the law in those circumstances. Assume bad intent. So look, her claim is, so this is Megan Phelps-Roper. And again, I think she just hasn't recognized the extent to which she remains fundamentally a Christian person with a Christian charitable perspective on the world. Quote, "Assuming ill motives cuts us off from understanding why someone does and believes as they do." Quotation number 2. "When we assume good or neutral intent, we have a better framework for dialogue." Now, what I'm saying to you is not the opposite of what she says. When you're dealing with someone in this kind of ideological conflict, so you meet someone who's a communist. Quite recently, I spoke to a guy, and he had an Instagram account. I believe his most recent picture of himself on Instagram was him proudly posing in front of a communist hammer and sickle flag. It was him identifying as a communist. and he was writing to me and saying he's a fan of my YouTube channel, and he appreciates what I say in criticizing communism, but he nevertheless remains a diehard, devoted communist. Now, what would it mean if you were going to talk to someone? And, my only real interest in this conversation, on one hand, okay, yeah, I appreciate you watch my channel. I appreciate that you're willing to listen to someone who's a total anti-communist. But, obviously my agenda is to try to make you uncomfortable with the compromises you're comfortable with, is to make you realize that what you're doing here, it's just as bad and evil and wrong as a young man who commits to the neo-Nazi movement and poses in front of a swastika flag. It is just as bad. It's just as serious. And what it tells me about you is just as dark, like on the judgment of the individual person. Whether or not the knock-on consequences are as bad is really another question. What do you think? You think I'm going to assume good intentions? You think I'm going to impute good intentions to him? I neither assign good intentions to him, nor do I assign bad intentions to him. I assume that he doesn't even know what his intentions are himself. His intentions, good or bad, I don't just work with the assumption that they're unknowable to me. I work with the assumption that they are unknowable to him. I've talked to people who used to be vegan. They used to be vegan activists. And then they became ex-vegan and they became anti-vegan. One of these guys, I could name him, but I won't. I notice at that time, he got a girlfriend with really big breasts, and he started posing on his Instagram with her in a wet bikini, showing off her breasts. Her face wasn't very pretty. I'm just being honest with you. She was one of those women. She had a really impressive pair of breasts, but not a very pretty face. And he was letting you know about it on Instagram. There were a couple other changes in his life. He was a guy who'd saved up a lot of money, and then he'd taken a few years off work, and he then returned to the workplace. There are a few different changes in his life at this time when he didn't just quit veganism. He actually became an anti-vegan activist, endorsing butter, claiming cow butter is healthy, things that most meat eaters don't believe. Most meat eaters think it's okay to indulge in butter, but they recognize it's unhealthy. He was endorsing, butter and beef and things. It was totally ridiculous. Now look, still today, like now in retrospect, I can't draw you a diagram. We can't set out billiard balls on a table and talk about cause and effect. Like, okay, like you went back to the workplace, started having work colleagues, you got this girlfriend with big breasts. Like, I can't give you a cause and effect relationship. Like, oh, you got laid and all of a sudden you don't care about ethics anymore. All right. Now, and by the way, I'm not even claiming it isn't that simple. For a lot of people, it is. For a lot of people, it's that simple. What they wanted was to get laid. There were people who became vegan to get laid. They became vegan because of a particular boyfriend or girlfriend, but they became vegan. They started being an activist, started going to events to get, no doubt, it can be that simple. Okay. But my point is, I don't know. And my conviction is he doesn't know either. I think he's not aware of how his sex life changed the way he viewed ethics, ecology, and ultimately even health and diet. Now, real quickly, I think you guys know there's a YouTuber who just uses the name Tooker. He used to be a fan of my channel. I used to be vegan. He knew a lot and talked about veganism, and he knew a lot about my specific cynical perspective on veganism. He made a video giving all his reasons why now he's ex-vegan. Now he eats meat and drinks milk and does whatever. He acquiesces in the culture of time. And his reasons, when I'm listening to them, so this is subjective, when I'm hearing them, I'm hearing bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. Then he admits he can't get laid. Right? That's the one that stands out to me as something palpable and real. I think, I'm reading this guy and his expression, I think he's down bad. He talks about his desire to get married and have children, to find a woman. I just mentioned he didn't mention his desire to sleep with 10 different women or 100 different women. He's talking about finding one woman and getting married and having kids. Not all guys are like that. Some guys would rather sleep with 200 women. But that was that's how he put it. I can't set out the billiard balls on the table and give you cause and effect, right? And I am not claiming that I know his motives, and I am not even claiming to judge his motives as good or bad. My point is, when I approach these situations, I assume and I treat people as if they do not know their bad intentions themselves. When you're talking about someone who's born Muslim, who's raised Muslim, do you think they know their reasons for continuing to be Muslim, for continuing to make excuses for their religion, to justify their commitment to their religion? Is that really something they can know themselves? Almost by definition, they'll only be able to know that and reflect on that and analyze it after they've lost their faith. It's after you've quit. All right. Now, communism. My parents were communists. I was, in effect, born and raised communist. I rejected communism. Okay. I can sit here now and tell you in detail. I can tell you how I felt about communism at age 10, at age 15, at age 20. Oh, yeah, now that I don't believe in it, and I can talk about my motivations and my parents' motivations, we can psychoanalyze this down to smithereens, right? Oh, I know now that I'm outside of the ideology, now that I'm outside of the belief system, right? Someone who's still inside it. I wish I could say to you, good or bad, they won't know their own intentions. But you know the truth is, they're always bad. They are always bad intentions, but they won't be able to recognize them. Not even if you say them yourself. Whether it's Islam, whether it's Christianity or another religion. I'm going to mention an example from Buddhism. How many people can say to you, while they're still inside the faith, that the reason why they still practice this religion was that every time they questioned it as a child, every time they stepped out of line, their grandfather took a stick and beat them? While you still believe, while you're still afraid of going to hell after you die, and while you still maybe want your grandfather to love you and approve of you, like while you're still in that relationship, you may have some really intense relationship with the grandfather who beat you. That's when you can't see that, and that's why you can't say that. It's a bad reason. It's a bad motivation. It's a bad intention. The fact that you're afraid of your father whipping you, or that there's this weird, like almost BDSM relationship to authority that shapes the way you live your life. There's no way it can be good. It's bad. But I won't know that about you, and you won't know that about yourself. I was once at a Buddhist retreat, so I could describe the whole situation. But anyway, this is a Buddhist institution and relatively philosophical. There were a bunch of people there with PhDs or some level of expertise in Buddhism, but it wasn't academic. This was, there were also people there who were just white people enthusiastic about meditation. It was a mixed crowd. There were some Chinese people there. There were some people from Sri Lanka there. There was good, about 50% white people, 50% East Asian traditional Buddhists, and some of the discussions were at a high academic level. Anyway, there was this white guy, and he was a former Buddhist monk. He had experience with the Zen Buddhist tradition, being a Zen monk, and he later went on to, after this conversation, he became a Theravada Buddhist monk in the Burmese tradition. So he was a serious, lifelong, passionate, lay Buddhist, you could say. Went on to become a serious monk. I doubt he's still alive, but anyway, probably died wearing the robe. He died walking the ancient narrow path to nirvana. So we're in this context, and I know his level of education with the scripture, with the philosophy of the ancient text. And I basically say, and we have an audience. There are other people there having this erudite discussion. I say to him, look, Buddhism is a religion of nonviolence, detachment, compassion, insight, this particular philosophy, this critique of desire. How can you possibly justify being a member of a corrupt form of the religion in which your normal religious practice is to beat someone with a stick. This is the Zen Buddhist practice. In some forms of Zen in Japan, it carries on. There's more than one form of Buddhism in Japan. But I knew the particular group he was with in the United States, they believed in beating you into enlightenment. Stupid. What? This is not what the Buddha taught. The Buddha did not teach beating people with a stick. And the guy stood there and he gave this completely erudite, like semi-Freudian, semi-philosophical, semi-Buddhist, lecture about his justification of why he thinks being beaten with a stick by a Zen master is. So I loved it. He spoke uninterrupted for a long time. And I stood there. I said, your parents beat you with a stick, didn't they? And your grandparents and your babysitter. And what you want to believe more than anything else is that they did it for a really good reason. And not just because they were stupid or afraid, didn't know what to do, and didn't know how to take care of you, and didn't know what to teach you. That, like, your parents might have been 18 at the time. A lot of people, whatever, whether they're 18 or 28, that your parents were just dumb, mixed up young people who didn't know how to raise a kid, and they hadn't taken a course in it, and whatever. And they're beating you for stupid, irrational, ignorant reasons. You want to believe more than anything else that these people had some kind of profound wisdom and insight that motivated them to beat you. And now you are acting out that same script again with a Zen master. Or what you want to believe, the fantasy you want to gratify, is that when they beat you for a stick, it's for your own good, it's for your own enlightenment, and it's because the person who holds the stick has some kind of profound, ineffable wisdom that you don't have. And he broke down on the spot. He fell apart into pixels. I have experience making people break down crying. Teachers, professors, authority figures, I do. Border guards get interrogated at the border and taking apart the people who are trying to interrogate. All right. And this dude, he was a preacher. He was used to preaching this same doctrine and variations of it. I'm just going to tell you, I don't know that I'm right. It's a very compelling analysis. And I saw this guy completely freak out and fall apart. I could be wrong. I don't know. Neither does he. Megan Phelps-Roper says, rule number 1, don't assume bad intent. I'm saying to you, assume that these people do not know their own bad intentions themselves. Why did my father become a communist? I think he went to his grave without ever knowing himself. I think you could read all his written work. A lot of it's on the internet now. Don't read it. It's garbage. It's terrible. But you could read what he wrote decade by decade and never find an answer. And you could ask him and never find an answer. And it's because he never lost his faith. He never stood outside of that ideology. He never stood outside of that belief system to look back on it and with real detachment evaluate, what his motives really were. And again, the hardest thing about challenging these people is not that they're radical. It's not that they're extreme. It's that they're comfortable. And you've got to make them uncomfortable. You've got to find the basis for the conflict and then escalate it. Okay. Point number 2 from Megan is ask questions. I think this woman just doesn't have experience with these kinds of conflicts. And the little bit of experience she has is as a conventionally good-looking woman in American culture. And this is, to me, telling. She says, quote, it gives them an opportunity to point out flaws in our position? No, it doesn't. So if I'm asking you questions, if I'm asking you, oh, how do you justify supporting Joseph Stalin when he did this terrible thing? That doesn't give the other person an opportunity to point out a flaw in my position. Okay. I say the opposite. Here addressing something. Actually, I could have talked about under point number 1 too, but point number 1 went on long enough. The real problem people get into, whether they're asking questions or making assertions or offering arguments, the real problem people get into is that they struggle over the moral high ground, over who is going to be a good, that you want the other person to regard you as morally good or as authoritative. All right. The way to give the other person the opportunity to point out a flaw in your own position is to go ahead and do it yourself, is to criticize your own position, is to expose its weaknesses, is to expose your own agenda, is to engage in self-criticism. It's not to ask them questions. And what she says here about asking questions, it's just completely wrong. Now, again, if she were kind of a large, imposing looking man, I think she'd have a very different experience of this in American culture. If you're asking someone, how do you know what you think you know about the Bible? How do you know what you think you know about the Quran? How do you know what you think you know about communism? How do you know what you think you know about how healthy it is to eat butter, saturated fat or something? Just what she's saying here, it's 180 degrees wrong. Now, when I talk to people, whether they're communists or fascists or left wing or right wing, whatever, liberals or conservatives, when I criticize my own position, I'm revealing its limits, I'm revealing its disadvantages, but I'm also revealing the kind of person I am. And I'm willing to say, look, I'm a terrible person. I'm a bad person. I'm not trying to be better than you. I'm telling you that for the kind of person I am, this is the program of action that I'm proposing. So really briefly, over the last 10 years, if you talk to left-wing people about the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, war in Syria, America's involvement in Israel-Palestine, the never-ending conflict, all right, so often left-wingers will begin with the assumption that it's completely preposterous for anyone to disagree with them. It's unimaginable to them that anyone takes the other point of view. You can't make progress by asking questions. It won't work. You can't say, oh, well, how do you know what you think you know about Hamas? How do you know what you think you know about Israel? 100% counterproductive, right? But I can attack my own position. I can criticize my own position, and I can reveal something important about the kind of person I am. So look, maybe I'm a terrible person. Maybe I'm worse than you in some ways. I'll tell you something. I care so much about democracy. Democracy is so important to me that I'm willing to support American imperialism, as you call it, in Cuba for the sake of democracy. I'm willing to support American imperialism in the Middle East. I'm willing to support a military alliance between the United States and Israel, even though Israel may have all kinds of problems. It may be a deeply flawed democracy. America also is a deeply flawed democracy. But the extent to which Israel is democratic and represents democracy and advances the cause of democracy, that's enough for me to see the conflict in this way. And now let's talk about you. Because with most left-wing people, they're instead thinking of this in terms of American democracy they think American imperialism is bad and evil and wrong. And then they don't care if they're supporting Hamas in Palestine. They don't care if they're supporting Bashar al-Assad in Syria. They don't care if they're supporting Muslim dictatorships or communist dictators. They don't care if they're supporting North Korea or Cuba. They don't care what horrible regime they're supporting as long as it's something that's against American imperialism. You can't make progress through questions. You can make progress through criticizing your own position. Well, look, I'm the kind of terrible person who sees democracy this way. Now, how about you? What do you see that makes your view of this so different? In criticizing my own position, I'm not just disclosing I'm not just disclosing my argument or something. I'm disclosing who I am, right? And that's the hardest thing to get across. And you'll never get there by questioning. And by the way, compare this to what I said about point one. In a sense, I'm disclosing my bad intentions. Like, and I've said to people, I've said to left-wing people, look, I am willing to accept a body count in the tens of thousands to create democracy. Like, to replace a dictatorship with democracy, I think that justifies tens of thousands of people dying in war. So that's my perspective. Now, like, maybe I'm a bad person. Like, maybe I'm a bad person the way you're not. But I notice your point of view where you say you're not willing to support that, and yet you are willing to justify tens of thousands of people dying in order to sustain a communist dictatorship, or even in some cases a Muslim dictatorship. It's totally paradoxical, but the left wing is insanely pro-Muslim in 2022. This is, strange bedfellows partly created by the Israel-Palestine conflict, so on and so forth. Okay. But you can see what I'm doing here. In part, what I'm describing in this video is nihilism in praxis. Okay. Point three, these last two I'm going to do very briefly. We're going to wrap this up. Point three, she says, stay calm. She says of her husband, he would always refuse to escalate the conflict. He would change the subject. He would tell a joke. He would recommend a book or gently excuse himself from the conversation. Close quote. Again, I think her perspective, on the one hand, she doesn't have a lot of experience with this. On the other hand, her perspective is just as this kind of good-looking female in these very peculiar circumstances. You're talking to someone who's a communist. You're talking to someone who's a devout Muslim, and you want to change their mind. You can't stay calm. It's totally counterproductive to stay calm. Even you're talking to your brother who is a gambler and drunk. Okay. The whole point is to let them know how much this means to you, how much it hurts you, how much it bereaves you. Like, you can say to your brother, I just can't stand the fact that when we were growing up, you were the smart one. You were smarter than me. I thought you were more gifted than me. And now you eat meat, you drink alcohol, you gamble, you lead this totally dissolute life. And compared to me, you might as well be retarded. Like, I'm moving ahead as an intellectual. I've made all this progress and growth, and I see you living this dissolute life. Don't stay calm. Show how it hurts you. Show how it chews you up inside. Show it gives you nightmares. So, look, I can't stand to talk to you anymore. I can't stand to look at you because I see how you've squandered your potential in life. What could be worse? And again, this is just confronting your brother about drinking and gambling. But it's the exact same thing. You're talking about your brother has become a communist. Your brother has become a neo-Nazi. Your brother has become a Muslim fundamentalist. Whatever the ideological commitment is, right? Saying to your brother, let me change the subject. Let me tell a joke. Let me recommend a book. Oh yeah. Have you read Karl Marx's Das Kapital? Let me change the topic of conversation. Excuse myself from the conversation. De-escalating doesn't work. And the worst part of all is it makes you complicit. If you de-escalate with your uncle, and your uncle's a Nazi, if you de-escalate with your grandfather's a member of the KKK, your grandfather's a racist, he's a white supremacist, you de-escalate, you get along with him, you use these tactics, right? You are going to feel dirty. And guess what? You are dirty. You're making yourself complicit. You're making yourself part of the mechanism of excuse-making people, the enablers that surround him in his life. And obviously this can be true too with drugs, alcohol, psychiatric medication, so many things. Oh, good for you. Let me just de-escalate. Let me recommend a book. Let me make a joke. Let me change that. No. So, again, I know it's the first thing I talk about in the video, so don't have to repeat myself, but exactly what we're talking about. The first 20 minutes of this video or something. We're actually talking about escalation. We're talking about conflict creation, not conflict resolution, not de-escalation, not conflict avoidance. All right. And number 4, this is also interesting. It's so obvious, and yet, I disagree with it. Point number 4 is simply, quote, make the argument, as opposed to treating, quote, the value of our position as obvious and self-evident. So I just say, I think this is failing to deal with the fact and failing to deal with the extent to which the problem we're trying to address in these conflicts is exactly that the people we're confronting, whether they're people we love, people who are complete strangers to us, for them, the value of their position is obvious and self-evident, right? Like that is exactly what we're trying to abnormalize, make them uncomfortable with. We're trying to reach down to the roots of the doubt that underlie this great oak tree of faith. What is your faith rooted in? It's rooted in scarcely suppressed self-contradictory doubts. And that's what we have to reach down into. And I don't think you do that by asserting your own argument. I think you do it by asserting your own doubts and then finding the way into what their doubts are. I think you actually do it not by talking about what you believe, but what it is you can't believe, what you couldn't accept, and the doubts that led you up to your current point of perspective. And if it's one-on-one, you're going to see them reacting to that because there are going to be things they've doubted too. There are going to be some things you have in common, and then you try to get at what it is they doubt. Okay, guys, we're coming up at 3 in the afternoon. I'm happy to have you all here. I noticed we have only 22 people in the audience. There was no advance warning for this unscheduled talk. I would appreciate it if you hit the thumbs up button. It helps more people discover the video. It helps them discover it and join the conversation while the conversation is ongoing. It also helps them discover it after the video is up. I would appreciate it if you shared the link with somebody, where it could make a difference in their lives. I normally say, only share the link to these videos with people, who are willing to hear it. It's like there's no point taking one of my videos and dumping it into a Reddit group where nobody wants to hear it, where there's no interest, there's no common ground. But in this case, I've got to say, maybe some of you have a brother who's a drunk and a gambler. You got to share this link with. Maybe you have parents or grandparents who are taking psychiatric medications. Maybe you have friends who in the past were highly motivated, firebrand atheists, and they've lost their passion for the advancement of the atheist movement. Maybe you have friends who were in the past vegan activists, and they've lost their passion for that. I think you probably do know people you can share the link with. And I've got to tell you, I don't present this video as a final decision on the matter. I would love to think there are people who can write into me and disagree with me, or even have an interview with me on Skype and present a contrasting point of view. All right. I didn't get into this movement, to stand alone. But the fact is, I am out here alone. Every day I'm asking these questions, and I wonder, why is nobody else asking them? I just close by reiterating what I said in the description to my most recent video posted on YouTube. Okay. With all of these things, with all of these struggles, yeah, you can think about the outcomes. Yes. But I'm not asking you to predict the future. What's the future of North Korea 5 years from now? What's the future of Syria 5 years from now? Okay. I'm asking you to think seriously about who you are going to be 5 years from now. What kind of a man, what kind of a woman? Because in choosing the struggles you engage in, whether those are purely academic and research-based struggles, whether those are explicitly political struggles, whether it is veganism, atheism, any kind of endeavor, whether it's even the struggle of a creative artist, the struggle to make a new film, whether it's a documentary film or narrative fiction, the struggle to illustrate and publish a children's storybook. You want to change the world in some ways. I'm asking you to examine seriously how that struggle is going to change who you are, because that is the one outcome you can control. And I hope 5 years from now, you're not dead, you're alive. I hope 5 years from now, you're not ashamed of who you are, of what you've become. I hope you're not looking back at the last 5 years and feeling that you also have squandered your potential.